Hi, it's Chris Titley here. As part of the Sub 11 podcast, I'm joined by Steven Yatomi-Clarke, a CEO and Managing Director of ASX-listed Prescient Therapeutics. Steven, thanks so much for being a part of this podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. Delighted to be here.
Steven, Prescient Therapeutics, can you give the listeners out there a bit of an understanding about the business and a little bit about the history, but also what you're involved in at the moment?
Sure. We are developing new drugs to fight cancer, in short, novel drugs. The drugs that clinicians are always trying to clamour for, that sometimes make the news, new improvements. So we're not doing any generics. We are not selling any drugs right now. We are developing new drugs to solve problems for cancer where there are currently no solutions. So trying to find those really difficult pockets and have solutions for patients. That's what we're about.
And Steven, there's obviously various types of cancer. Are you targeting one particular type, or is it more of a generic product that you're developing?
We've looked in the past at a range of different cancers across our programs, but at the moment we're focusing on certain types of blood cancers that don't really have many options available.
Excellent. And then in regards to the research and development and product suite, how can you describe to the listeners around what you're trying to do, the plays that you've got currently, and I suppose the pipeline of progress?
Yeah, there is one particular cancer that we're addressing with our lead drug, PTX100. It's a disease called T-cell lymphoma, and many of your listeners may not have heard of this. The actor Sam Neill recently shone a light on this when he came forward that he was battling this particular cancer. It's what happens quite cruelly when your own immune system becomes cancerous. Normally you have T cells in your body that patrol your body and fight infection, and they also patrol your body for the start of cancer cells, and they're meant to get rid of those as well. But in a cruel twist of fate, sometimes those good cops become bad cops. And you can imagine how tricky that is to try to weed out the bad cops from the good ones and try to get rid of them. And that's why it is a very tricky disease to develop drugs for. But we are attempting to address that specific problem, and we've got a drug that is showing some promise there with respect to some actual clinical data and human data, showing that we're able to work where other drugs are perhaps not working so well.
Can I ask from someone that's not medically trained, etc., how this sort of came about, and then the roadmap of okay, here's an idea, how do we start this, how do we progress it, how do we commercialise it, and how does it then become well known?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two ways. Firstly, the steps towards getting a drug into the hands of patients that a doctor can use. It's a long, arduous journey, and it's fraught with risk.
So, yep.
So when you see an expensive drug there that's being subsidised by the PBS, I think listeners have really got to appreciate that for every drug that made it, there were thousands and thousands of drugs that people attempted that just didn't make it to the finish line. The process begins with discovery in a lab. In our case, it was discovered and invented at Yale University, and we've licensed it from them, so some good pedigree there. Once it's discovered, you do a bunch of testing in Petri dishes and test tubes and whatnot. Then you might graduate, or you do need to graduate, to animal studies, and with a bunch of work behind you, you then enter human experimentation, clinical trials, and it's broken down into three phases really. Phase 1, is it safe and at various doses? Then phase 2, does it look like it's working and killing the cancer? And phase 3 is the big definitive one. How well is it working? Does it work better than what's out there, or not quite as good as what's out there? And at the end of all of that, then the regulator could give you a green light and be able to market it. So that's, I guess, the life cycle of a drug. That's how a drug goes from a lab into a patient. And we're at the stage of that journey where sort of at the point end of those clinical trials now. So all of that, time and money and risk is increasingly in our rear view mirrors. It's still got a lot of it ahead of us, but we're at this stage now where we've got clinical evidence that this drug looks to be working, and we're seeking to ask that question: how well does that work?
And then from the approvals of the various boards or whatever you need to find, I mean, how many? I think that you're talking about a phase B or phase 2 stage. How many phases are there? And then what's the milestone, I suppose, people look out for to say, wow, this is actually now going to be really, really big?
Yeah, all of that discovery and preclinical work, that's probably about 10 years worth of work before it hits a human vein.
Wow.
Again,
okay.
That's behind us.
Yep.
And then that phase 1 study, is it safe? That is now behind us. We've got a couple of patients still on study because they're responding, which is great.
Yep.
So we're now at that phase 2 stage, phase 2 of those 3. But what we're hoping is that because we've got a rarer disease that there's an unmet need for, that we can squish the phase 2 and a phase 3 component hopefully into one bigger trial, that we will either know very quickly whether it works and can be an approved drug in a relatively short space of time or not. So we are right at that important question that 10, 15 years of work is prelude to this. So if you like, your viewers are tuning in at like the 90-minute mark of the movie. You know what I mean?
Right, okay. You've already had the first ad break, yep.
Yeah, this is
all
right.
Through.
This is,
the fourth quarter of a basketball game, there you go.
That's right.
And then from that, let's assume that it becomes successful. What's the next phase after that in your pipeline? Obviously, you've got different plans on different scenarios, but looking at Nirvana scenario.
Yeah, so what we'd be doing then is focusing very much on the commercialization, and we'd ideally be finding a partner, maybe in one jurisdiction, one group of countries, one continent or another, who can actually take this and market it on our behalf, and we will get in return, royalties and sales milestones, chunky payments, that type of thing. So in the event of success, that will be our focus. I'm not really too keen on building our own sales team. Maybe in some smaller countries like Australia that might be possible, but it's certainly not the preference. So we'd be focused then on getting that commercialized. But we've got a couple of other things in our assets in our portfolio as well that are earlier in
the first quarter, not the fourth quarter.
Yeah, so we would be obviously looking at the up and coming assets in the pipeline and trying to add disproportionate value to those to get those commercialized.
You mentioned something around that no one's ever done this before. Is there sort of a baseline or any sort of precedent of competition? And with your other suite in terms of your portfolio, how important is it to sort of collaborate with other research centres around the world and looking around what is out there?
Well, that's really how we've built our portfolio, is trying to pick the eyes out of the best technologies from the best places in the world. Like, again, our lead asset is from Yale University and Moffitt Cancer Center, the third largest in the US. We've got assets from Penn and Oxford. So your viewers would all have heard of those. We work very closely with the Peter MacCallum Cancer Center here in Australia, who are, elite by world standards with their research. So we're always trying to find things that complement what we're doing and where we're trying to position ourselves. So diseases of unmet need, but also if there are platform type of technologies that can solve a bunch of problems that other people have, we're interested in that. So we're trying to leverage our strengths, but also just really stay focused out. Make no mistake, our focus here is PTX 100, and where that is at that stage of the movie that I said, we just have to focus on getting that to the finish line.
And speaking of the stage, your recent ASX announcement, you've been invited to a conference. We're sitting here at the end of May, in June or next week, I believe, in California. Can you talk about the importance of that conference? And you obviously, I think you're showcasing potentially some results.
Yeah, absolutely. This is some viewers may not fully appreciate what it means to be invited to present at these conferences and to a plenary session. It means that your drug has international significance, in these particular areas. So this is the third now on the conference where we've been invited to present. The first one was a huge blood disease conference in California in December. Then there was another specialty one in April, and this is, the big one for lymphomas, this particular one. And being asked to basically headline it, if you like, is a big deal, because all of these people, all of these experts, whether they're the doctors or industry participants, are all there to see what is the latest and the best thing that's happening now. What do I need to know? And they're putting Prescient up there at the top, going, this is significant. So it's significant. It's a good validation. This is not just Steven here saying, hey, everyone, our drug looks to be pretty good. Please look over here and pay attention. What we're saying is the community is saying this is worthy of anything, of a lot of attention. It's at the very least comparable with the next best options out there being considered. This is significant. Set up and pay attention. Travel and come and see this and hear from the doctor who's developing this. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, I'd imagine it would be, and I suppose there'll be lots of different counterparties and stakeholders there at that conference. I'm interested to know from just again a curiosity point of view around PTX 100 exactly how it works, and then what the doctors would do, and I suppose what you're looking for in patients, and then that sort of will gauge into an understanding around why the business exists.
Yeah, I'll answer that in two parts. So the first one is, how does it work? In cancer cells, the difference between a cancer cell and a healthy cell. Okay, in a healthy cell knows when to start growing, when to stop growing, and even when to die off and let a healthier cell take over. That's what happens all the time in our body, our skin cells, our bone cell, everything. Sometimes those growth switches get stuck, like in a stuck accelerator pedal, right? So, and they know when to start growing and keep growing, and it doesn't know when to stop. Well, that's the definition of cancer. And so what this drug does is it switches off some problematic pathways that are happening in the cell that send that mixed signal. So it unsticks the accelerator pedal and applies the brake and kills the cell.
That's a good analogy. Yep.
Yeah, so that's how our drug works. It's not chemo, which is basically carpet bombing your body with poison and hoping that that the good cells will outlive the bad cells by just a war of attrition. We are not chemo. We're trying to switch off these very specific switches inside the cell and unstick that brake, that accelerator.
Fantastic. And then obviously, as you mentioned, the time and effort and cost to get this far, from a financial point of view, can you talk about your balance sheet and where it's at now, and I suppose, do you have the funds moving forward to accelerate the business?
Yeah, sure. So millions been spent on this to date, and we're piggybacking all of that. Our last reporting, I think we had 15, 16 million in cash. So we're in a good position. That won't be enough to finish the whole trial that we're doing, but it will certainly be enough to not only get it started, but get to a meaningful inflection point to be able to see whether this is go or no go, and hopefully re-rate the company. So we're in a enviable position in that respect, especially when the market's pretty tough in our sector. We're not too bad.
When you come to these results, and obviously you mentioned phase 2 and phase 3, then what's the further? Is it a stamp of approval, or is there another sort of timeline or milestone that people or potential investors should be looking out for?
Yeah, so once it gets through that phase, if we finish this current study that we're planning, there may or may not be a confirmatory trial that's required, but that would be after an approval, in the event that it works. So yes, I don't want to give
for sure.
false impression and talk about it as a fait accompli. This may not work. We're in the business of finding out whether it works or not. If it doesn't work, we will kill the trial early and save our money. If it does work, then the next step will be commercialization, really.
I'm curious as well also about sort of technology. We're talking about a world of AI and a world of data, etc. Has that played any role particularly in these trials and I suppose moving forward with particular drugs?
AI, let's start there, because that's such a fascinating area and I'm personally watching it very, very closely. It's not like many of these technological revolutions, I think it initially happens a lot slower than people expect, and then it happens way faster.
Yep.
And overtakes you.
Yep.
And I think that's what we're going to see in the biological sciences. It's not like ChatGPT, where create an essay on evolution for me, and it can pull out all the words in the universe and create something there. With science, it's quite different. There are no words that you can pull together. You need to pull together data, right? And the problem is, and this is going to be the big limitation for a while time-wise, that data hasn't been standardized. So who's going to go through the universe of data and standardize everything so that an AI system can make sense of it? Because I can tell you now, even with the one trial, with the one drug, you can go from, even in the one hospital, one doctor or one clinician will input data a certain way, and there might be a subtle difference from the person next to them. So trying to make sense of that, this was meant for human interpretation, not machine learning. So it's going to be a long time before we see radical changes. If people think, I'm just going to type in an algorithm, I'm going to come up with a new drug, like that's some time down the road, and it will come.
Yep.
At the moment, I think we'll see incremental improvements along the way, probably in rational drug design, maybe in how trials might be conducted, those types of things. But it's not like, oh, we're going to fast track our trial by plugging in some magical AI into this. It's going to take some time. And once all of that's done, we're then going to see massive acceleration. I think we'll actually see AI have a much bigger role earlier in the human experience for medicine at the doctor level. I don't think we're going to see it at the medicine development level just yet, but it'll help your GP, for example, be a much better GP by being able to synthesize a whole bunch of data very quickly, or you being able to maybe, do telemedicine much more efficiently. I think that's where we'll start to see it first.
Fantastic. No, I agree. I think it's very new, and people are sort of understanding how the commercial elements and different verticals, and particularly in the finance world as well, like it's how you can apply it. It's sort of a little bit of an analogy to me, like a blockchain a few years ago was like this thing that comes out and goes, wow, how do we commercially use it? And it sort of maybe still hasn't come. But when it does come, people are like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. We're digressing a little bit, but Steven, thank you so much for taking the time out today to have a chat about Prescient Therapeutics. Obviously a big little period coming up for you with PTX 100. I wish you all the best and looking forward to catching up.
Many thanks. Thanks for having me, and wishing you and your viewers a wonderful day.